Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
1 in every 4 cowboys in the Old West was black. Yes, you heard that right. 1 in every 4. Federal marshals, armed women soldiers in disguise, tycoons, rodeo inventors. All black, all erased. America built the greatest mythology on the planet on top of the Old West, and forgot to mention that a good portion of the real protagonists were not white. Today, you're going to learn 16 names that should be in every history book, but are not. They were men who arrested more than 3,000 criminals without ever taking a bullet. Women who enlisted in the army disguised as men. Former enslaved women who bought entire city blocks in Los Angeles. Cowboys who invented techniques that rodeo still uses today. Spies who financed revolutions with money from domestic espionage. None of them got a statue. None of them became a movie. But all of them built the West that the whole world knows without knowing who actually made it. Number 1. Cathay Williams, the woman who fooled the entire army. In 1866, a formerly enslaved woman from Missouri did something that no woman, white or black, had ever done before. She cut her hair, put on a male uniform, and enlisted in the United States Army under the name William Cathay. She was 22 years old, stood over 5 feet 7 inches tall, and had a determination that no sergeant could break. She was assigned to the 38th Infantry Regiment, the famous Buffalo Soldiers, units composed exclusively of black men who patrolled the most dangerous territories of the West. Cathay marched hundreds of miles through New Mexico and Arizona, carrying equipment that weighed nearly 45 pounds. She slept alongside dozens of men, wore the same uniforms, passed the same inspections. Nobody ever suspected a thing. The secret lasted 2 full years. In 1868, a smallpox outbreak hit the regiment and knocked soldiers down one after another. Cathay fell ill and was taken to the military doctor. That is when they discovered the truth. The surgeon examined the soldier, William Cathay, and found a woman. The news spread through the camp like wildfire. Cathay received an immediate discharge. There was no medal, there was no recognition, only the way out. After the army, Cathay tried to build a civilian life in Colorado. She married a man who seemed decent, until the day he tried to steal her money and her horses. Her response was direct. She had the husband arrested. In the following years, she worked as a seamstress and cook in small western towns, living on the bare minimum, carrying scars from a war that nobody knew she had fought, without ever receiving a pension. In 1891, already sick and without resources, Cathay applied to the federal government for a disability pension. The Army denied it. The woman who served as a Buffalo Soldier and survived smallpox died without receiving a single penny from the country she helped protect. Her story remained buried in military archives for over a century. Only in 2018 was a statue erected in Leavenworth, Kansas, 150 years after she put on the uniform that nobody believed a woman would wear. Number 2. Bass Reeves, the real Lone Ranger. Born enslaved in Arkansas in 1838, Bass Reeves lived the first half of his life as the property of another man. During the Civil War, he escaped to Indian Territory, where he learned to survive in the most dangerous lands in the country. He learned Native American languages, memorized every trail and every hideout in that wild region. Freedom cost dearly, but he paid. In 1875, the federal government needed someone who knew Indian Territory like no one else. They chose Reeves, one of the first black federal marshals in American history. The job was simple on paper: arrest the worst criminals on the frontier. In practice, it meant riding alone through lawless territories where every tree could hide an ambush and every stranger could be a wanted killer. The numbers are impressive. Over more than 3 decades, Reeves arrested more than 3,000 criminals. He killed 14 in self-defense. It is said he was never hit by a bullet, even when facing entire gangs. His method was brilliant. He disguised himself as a beggar, a preacher, a harmless old man. He approached the target as if he wanted nothing. By the time the outlaw noticed, he was already in handcuffs, legendary aim and the patience of a predator. But here comes the hardest test of his career. At a certain point, Reeves received an arrest warrant with his own son's name on it, accused of murder. Any other man would have passed the case along. Reeves did not. He rode out, found his son, and arrested him personally. He brought him to the tribunal without exception, without privilege. For Reeves, the law had no last name. That story alone says everything about the kind of man he was. And then came Hollywood. When they decided to create a masked hero who rode with a Native American partner, mounted a white horse, and followed a strict code of honor, they made him white. The Lone Ranger, the shameless copy of Bass Reeves, became an American icon. The real man was erased. America took his story, changed the skin color, and sold it as original fiction for decades. Bass Reeves died in January 1910 in Muskogee, Oklahoma, at the age of 71. Kidney disease took the man that no bullet could bring down. He died practically forgotten, without a film, without a paragraph in school textbooks. Only a century later did the country begin to correct that debt. In 2012, a bronze statue was erected in Fort Smith, Arkansas, the same place where he used to deliver his prisoners. The legend finally got a face in the public square. Number 3. Stagecoach Mary, the woman that neither wolf nor blizzard could stop. Born enslaved in the 1830s, Mary Fields stood nearly 6 feet tall, smoked thick cigars, drank whiskey at the bar counter, and carried a .38 caliber revolver on her hip like someone carries a handkerchief in their pocket. In an era when women could barely vote, Mary did whatever she pleased, and nobody had the courage to complain. In 1895, already past the age of 60, Mary won the contract to deliver mail for the United States Postal Service in Cascade, Montana. She became the first black female mail carrier in American history. The route was brutal, up to 300 miles per week, crossing roads covered in snow, infested with wolves, and with no protection other than her own courage. Not a single delivery was ever lost. On one of the coldest nights in Montana, Mary's horses froze on the road and died. Any other mail carrier would have turned back. Mary did not. She threw the mail sack onto her back and walked miles alone in the dark, through snow that reached up to her waist, until she reached the next town. She delivered every letter, every package, every envelope. For those waiting for news from home, Mary was the person who never failed. In Cascade, Montana, Mary was treated with a mix of fear and respect. She was the only woman in town authorized to drink at the local bar, a privilege she exercised without the slightest ceremony. It is said that she once knocked a man down with a single punch after an argument over a gambling debt. The fellow was twice her size. He got up off the ground, dusted off his clothes, and never opened his mouth near Mary Fields again. Nobody was that crazy. Mary died in 1914 at the age of 82 in Cascade, the same town she served for nearly 2 decades. The funeral was packed. Cowboys, merchants, families who received letters thanks to her. Everyone showed up. In an era when America treated black people as second-class citizens, Mary Fields was first class in everything she did. The toughest mail carrier in the Old West died of old age, not a bullet. Number 4. Bill Pickett, the man who took down bulls with his teeth. Born in 1870 in Texas, the son of formerly enslaved people with Cherokee blood, Bill Pickett spent his childhood watching how ranch dogs controlled cattle, by biting the lower lip of the steer until the animal surrendered. One day, the boy decided to do the same thing. He grabbed a calf by the horns, twisted its neck, and bit down. The animal fell. That is how bulldogging was born. The technique became a sensation. Pickett performed at rodeos across the country, taking down bulls that weighed more than 800 pounds using nothing but his hands and his mouth. The crowd could not believe what they were seeing. A black man, lean, biting the mouth of a furious bull until the animal collapsed to the ground. It was brutal, it was risky, it was absolutely real. No white cowboy of the era could replicate what Pickett did. In the 1900s, Pickett became a star of the Wild West circuit, traveling across the United States, Europe, and South America with the famous 101 Ranch of Oklahoma. He appeared in the first all-black Western films, bringing his art to the screen before Hollywood decided that cowboys could only be white. But even as a star, hotels refused to lodge him because of his skin color. He ate in the back while white colleagues sat at the table. The most ironic detail is that the technique Pickett invented became one of the most popular events in modern professional rodeo. To this day, steer wrestling, as they call bulldogging, is competed in championships around the world. Thousands of white cowboys compete using a technique created by a black man who could not even enter through the front door of the hotels where he performed. The inventor received no royalties. He received contempt. In April 1932, at the age of 61, Bill Pickett was kicked in the head by a wild horse at a ranch in Oklahoma. He died 11 days later. The man who faced bulls his whole life was taken down by a horse. In 1972, 40 years after his death, he was finally inducted into the National Rodeo Hall of Fame, the first black person to receive that honor. America was slow, but the legend did not wait for permission. Number 5. Nat Love, the cowboy who was born in chains and died forgotten. Born enslaved in Tennessee in 1854, Nat Love did not wait for an invitation to start living. At the age of 15, in 1869, he set out alone toward the west with nothing but the clothes on his back. He arrived in Dodge City, Kansas, and proved his worth by taming on the first try a wild horse that had thrown every other candidate. He was hired on the spot. In the following years, Love drove cattle through Texas, Arizona, and territories that most men avoided. He faced storms, river crossings, Native American attacks, and shootouts with cattle rustlers. In 1876, he entered a contest in Deadwood, South Dakota, where he roped, threw, tied, saddled, and mounted a wild horse in just 9 minutes. He earned the nickname he carried forever, Deadwood Dick. Love wrote his own autobiography in 1907, something extremely rare for a formerly enslaved person of the era. In the book, he describes shootouts, miraculous escapes, and adventures that sound like fiction, but that other cowboys and newspapers of the time confirmed. He knew that if he did not tell his own story, nobody would tell it for him. And he was right. Even with the book published, America preferred its white movie cowboys. When the Old West began to die, Love did what thousands of cowboys were forced to do. He adapted. He traded the saddle for the train and worked as a baggage porter on the Pullman line, serving white passengers who would never imagine that this polite man had once been one of the most feared cowboys on the plains. From frontier hero to baggage handler, that was the social mobility available to a black man at the turn of the century. Nat Love died in 1921 at the age of 66 in Los Angeles, working as a railroad porter. No major newspaper covered his death, no politician gave a speech, no film was made. The cowboy who conquered Deadwood, who tamed horses nobody could tame, and who wrote his own legend in an era when black people could barely read, was buried in silence. Deadwood Dick deserved more than America was willing to give. Number 6. Mary Ellen Pleasant, the spy who bought San Francisco. Born in 1814, Mary Ellen Pleasant learned early that information was worth more than gold. She worked as a domestic servant in the wealthiest homes in California, not out of humility, but out of strategy. While serving dinner, she listened to conversations about investments, business, and properties. Then she applied what she learned. She turned millionaire gossip into a fortune of her own. In San Francisco, Pleasant accumulated real estate, restaurants, and boarding houses, becoming one of the wealthiest women in the city. On the 1890 census, when asked her profession, she did not write domestic servant. She wrote capitalist, a black woman formerly enslaved, declaring herself a capitalist in 19th century America. The audacity of that answer says more about Pleasant than any biography. Pleasant actively worked with the Underground Railroad, helping enslaved people escape to free states. There are records that she donated around $30,000, a fortune at the time, to John Brown, the abolitionist who led the famous rebellion at Harper's Ferry. Pleasant financed the freedom of others while building her own, a double play that few in history managed to pull off. The white society of San Francisco did not know how to deal with Pleasant. She was too rich to ignore, too influential to confront, and too clever to corner. The newspapers of the time called her Mammy Pleasant, a racist nickname that tried to diminish her. She hated the label, but kept operating behind the scenes, moving pieces that powerful men did not even notice. She was a chess player in a world of checkers players. Mary Ellen Pleasant died in 1904, at the age of 89, almost penniless. Partners and allies had been appropriating her fortune over the years. The woman who built an empire through intelligence and audacity ended up depending on the charity of others. On her tombstone, there is an inscription that she herself chose, Mother of Human Rights in California. No other gravestone in the Old West carries a title that heavy. Number 7. Rufus Buck, the teenager who declared war on the white man. The son of a black mother and a Creek father, Rufus Buck grew up watching Indian territory being invaded by white settlers who took land, broke treaties, and treated black and native people like trash. At the age of 18, he decided that diplomacy did not work. He gathered 4 friends, all young black and Creek men, and formed a gang with a single objective: to drive the whites out. Between July and August of 1895, the Rufus Buck gang unleashed a wave of terror that lasted exactly 13 days. They killed a federal marshal, robbed stores and ranches, and terrorized entire families in Indian Territory. They were not common thieves. They had a cause, however violent their methods were. They wanted the territory back, and they were willing to die for it. 13 days of fury that shook the entire region. The response came fast and heavy. Armed posses, federal marshals, and even troops mobilized to hunt down 5 teenagers. The gang was captured in August 1895. All of them were taken to Fort Smith, Arkansas, before the feared Judge Isaac Parker, the hanging judge who had already sent dozens of men to the gallows. The trial was short, the sentence predictable: death by hanging for all of them. In July 1896, Rufus Buck and his 4 companions climbed the scaffold at Fort Smith. None of them had turned 21. Before dying, Rufus handed over a photograph of his mother with a poem written on the back: 5 furious boys against an entire system. They lost, as expected, but the rage that moved them against the invasion and the theft of lands, that did not die with them. More than a century later, Hollywood finally told part of this story. The film The Harder They Fall from 2021, with Idris Elba playing Rufus Buck, brought his name back. But the film is stylized fiction. The reality was rawer, younger, and more desperate. 5 teenagers who knew they were going to die and still chose to fight. Number 8. Biddy Mason, the enslaved woman who bought Los Angeles. Born enslaved in Georgia in 1818, Biddy Mason chose nothing in the first 38 years of her life. She was forced to walk 1,700 miles barefoot from Mississippi to Utah, behind her Mormon master's wagon, tending cattle and children during the entire crossing. 1,700 miles without shoes, without rest, without dignity. When the owner decided to enter California, he made a fatal mistake. He brought his enslaved people into a free state. Biddy found out that California law prohibited slavery. In 1856, she did something that required an absurd amount of courage. She went to the courthouse alone, without a lawyer, without money, without allies, and petitioned for her own freedom. The judge heard her case and ruled in her favor. Biddy Mason freed herself with the strength of a single petition. Free, Biddy began working as a midwife and nurse in Los Angeles. She earned $10 a week. She saved every penny. When she had saved enough, she did what nobody expected from a formerly enslaved woman. She bought land. In 1866, she acquired a lot on Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles for $250. At that time, the entire city was dust and ranches. Biddy saw what nobody else could see, the future. The lots appreciated in value astronomically. Biddy bought more, and more, and more. In a few decades, her fortune surpassed $300,000, the equivalent of millions today. A woman who started life barefoot behind a wagon became one of the wealthiest people in Los Angeles. She inherited nothing. She did not marry into money. She built everything with her own hands, penny by penny, lot by lot. But Biddy did not keep the fortune for herself. She founded nurseries, fed prisoners, helped families who were going hungry, and co-founded the first AME church in Los Angeles. Her home was a refuge for anyone in need, black or white. The money that America tried to prevent her from earning, she gave back in the form of generosity that the entire city recognized. Biddy Mason was the opposite of the stereotype that the system wanted to impose. Biddy died in 1891 at the age of 73. Her legacy remained buried for decades until Los Angeles finally recognized the woman who helped build the city. Today, a park in downtown LA bears her name. A memorial marks the site where her original lots once stood. The barefoot enslaved woman who walked 1,700 miles became the owner of the ground she walked on. And that is something nobody can erase. Number 9. Jim Beckwourth, the formerly enslaved man who became a Native American war chief. Born in Virginia in 1798, the son of a white plantation owner and an enslaved woman, Beckwourth gained his freedom and headed for the western mountains as a trapper, a fur hunter. In an era when survival depended on knowing how to read nature, Beckwourth became one of the most skilled frontiersmen in the country. In the 1820s, Beckwourth came into contact with the Crow Nation and something extraordinary happened. He was not only accepted by the tribe, but ended up becoming a war chief. He fought alongside the Crow in battles against rival tribes, married Crow women, and lived for years as one of them, a formerly enslaved black man commanding Native American warriors in combat. Try to find that scene in any Hollywood film. You will not. Beckwourth also discovered a crucial pass in the Sierra Nevada that made the crossing for thousands of pioneers heading to California much easier. The Beckwourth Pass, as it became known, turned into an essential route during the gold rush. The man who was born as the property of another opened a literal path for thousands of free people to build new lives in the West. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. The story of his death is shrouded in mystery and legend. Beckwourth died in 1866 at the age of 68 during a visit to the Crow people. Some historians believe that the Crow themselves poisoned him, not out of hatred, but as a ritual of honor. The belief was that poisoning a great warrior kept his spirit bound to the tribe forever. If true, it was the most contradictory death in the Old West. America never knew how to classify Jim Beckwourth. Too black for white people, too white for black people. Native American by choice, American by birth, an outsider everywhere. His entire life was a refusal to fit into the boxes that society manufactured. Explorer, warrior, trapper, discoverer. And no school textbook ever put his name alongside Lewis and Clark. The West had many paths. Beckwourth opened his own. Number 10. Clara Brown, the formerly enslaved woman who washed clothes to find her lost daughter. Born in 1800 in Virginia, Clara was sold and separated from her family while still young. She lost her husband, her children, and every human bond she possessed. When she finally gained her freedom at the age of 56, most people in her situation would have simply tried to survive. Clara did the opposite. She decided to get rich in order to find the family that was stolen from her. In 1859, Clara Brown arrived in Colorado at the height of the gold rush. Without money and without connections, she opened a laundry in Central City. She washed clothes for miners covered in mud, sweat, and dust. Hard work that few could endure. Clara endured. She charged 50 cents per shirt and saved everything. In a few years, she opened the first laundry in Gilpin County and saved enough money to buy properties in Denver. But money was never the ultimate goal. Clara spent nearly her entire fortune tracking down the children who had been sold decades earlier. She paid investigators, wrote letters, traveled thousands of miles following leads. The search lasted years. When most people would have given up, Clara kept going, and finally, after the Civil War, she found her daughter Eliza Jane, alive, free, on the other side of the country. The reunion happened after nearly 30 years of forced separation. While searching for her family, Clara never stopped helping others. She opened her home to newly freed slaves who arrived in Colorado with nothing. She fed, sheltered, and guided families who were starting from zero. She founded the first Protestant church in Colorado. In Denver, she earned the nickname Aunt Clara, not out of kinship, but because of the care she showed to anyone in need. Her generosity knew no skin color. Clara Brown died in October 1885 at the age of 85. In 1989, more than a century later, she was inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, a formerly enslaved woman who washed clothes to buy real estate, who crossed the country to find her daughter, and who built an entire community from nothing. The American frontier was made of people like her, invisible in books, unforgettable to those who knew them. Number 11. Mark Matthews, the Buffalo soldier who crossed 3 wars and died at the age of 111. Born in 1894 in Ohio, Mark Matthews enlisted in the Army at the age of 15, lying about his age. He joined the Buffalo Soldiers, the black units that patrolled the West and carried one of the most respected nicknames in American military history. The 15-year-old boy did not know he would spend the next 3 wars in uniform. In 1916, Matthews took part in the pursuit of the Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa. He rode hundreds of miles across the Mexican desert under the orders of General Pershing, facing ambushes and brutal heat. The expedition did not capture Villa, but Matthews came back alive, which was already more than many managed. In the following years, he rose in rank and became an instructor, training recruits for the conflicts to come. In the 1930s, Matthews received an unusual assignment, tending to President Franklin Roosevelt's stables at the White House. The former frontier rider, who had chased Pancho Villa across the desert, was now caring for the horses of the most powerful man in the world. When World War II broke out, Matthews returned to active duty and was sent to the South Pacific, proving that age had not diminished his readiness for combat. The longevity of Matthews is what makes his story almost unbelievable. He survived 3 wars, served under 6 presidents, and watched America change from a segregated country to one that at least tried to disguise its racism. In the final years of his life, he was sought out by historians and journalists who wanted to hear first-hand accounts of an era that already seemed like fiction. Matthews was the living memory of a vanished age. Mark Matthews died in September 2005 at the age of 111 in Washington, D.C. He was one of the last living Buffalo soldiers on the planet. He was buried with military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. The boy who lied about his age to join the Army lived longer than anyone who tried to kill him. 3 wars, an entire century of history, and the heart of a soldier that simply refused to stop beating. Number 12. York, the black man who mapped America and went back to slavery. Between 1804 and 1806, the Lewis and Clark expedition crossed American territory from the Mississippi to the Pacific. It was one of the most important journeys in United States history, and there was a black man on the team. His name was York, born enslaved, the property of William Clark since childhood. He was not invited on the expedition. He was brought along like luggage. But York proved to be indispensable. He hunted, explored unknown terrain, and took as many risks as any free man in the group. For the native tribes they encountered along the way, York was an absolute novelty. They had never seen a dark-skinned man before. Some tribes tried to rub his skin, thinking it was paint. York became an unexpected diplomatic asset, helping to open doors that the expedition needed in order to survive. When the expedition returned in 1806, everyone was treated as heroes, everyone except York. While Lewis and Clark received land, money, and public recognition, York went back to slavery. He asked Clark for his freedom repeatedly. Clark refused every time. The man who helped map a continent did not even have the right to his own body. The irony is so grotesque it seems invented, but it is documented in the expedition's own journals. Historians believe Clark finally freed York years later, perhaps around 1811. Once free, York tried to make a living as a teamster, hauling goods between states. The business failed. Without resources, without connections, and without the recognition he deserved, York disappeared from the records. Most believe he died of cholera around 1832, somewhere near St. Louis. No marked grave, no obituary. The story of York remained buried for nearly 2 centuries. The man who helped map a continent received no land, no immediate freedom, and no gratitude. Only in 2003 did Louisville, Kentucky, the region where York and his family lived most of their lives, erect a statue in his honor. 200 years of silence to recognize someone who risked his life alongside Lewis and Clark and came home in chains. America is slow, but sometimes it corrects itself. Number 13. Elizabeth Thorne Scott Flood, the woman who opened a school when they shut the door in her son's face. Born free in New York in 1828, Elizabeth moved to Sacramento, California, after becoming a widow. When she tried to enroll her son in the local school, the answer was simple and brutal. Black children were not accepted. Instead of accepting the humiliation, Elizabeth built her own answer, a school. In 1854, Elizabeth opened a school for black children in Sacramento. She started with a few students in an improvised room with materials she bought herself, but demand grew. Families of Asian immigrants and Native Americans requested spots. Elizabeth opened the doors to everyone. In an America that separated children by color, a black woman created the most inclusive space in California, decades before any integration law. Elizabeth did not stop at the classroom. She became the first African-American teacher in a California public school, breaking a barrier that seemed insurmountable. Her work drew attention in Sacramento, where authorities began to realize that segregated education was not only unjust, but inefficient. A single woman, without institutional support, forced the system to look in the mirror and admit it was wrong. The saddest part is that Elizabeth did not live to see the full impact of what she built. She died at the age of 39, far too young for a life that had already accomplished so much. But the seed she planted bore fruit. Her daughter, Lydia Flood, was one of the first black children to attend an integrated public school in Oakland. The mother opened the door, the daughter walked through it. 2 generations to cross a line that should never have existed. The story of Elizabeth is proof that not every legend of the Old West wore a gun and a hat. Some carried books and chalk. In an era when the frontier solved problems with bullets, this woman solved them with education. There is no statue of her in Sacramento. There is no film with her name. But every integrated school in California carries, without knowing it, a piece of what Elizabeth started alone in an improvised room in 1854. Number 14. Isom Dart, the horse thief that nobody could capture. Born enslaved around 1849, Isom Dart gained his freedom after the Civil War and headed west with no plan at all. The first honest profession did not last long. Dart discovered he was extraordinarily good at one thing, stealing horses and disappearing. In a few years, he became one of the most wanted thieves in Wyoming and Colorado. Dart's talent was not in violence, it was in invisibility. The man changed his name, altered his appearance, and vanished like smoke. Bounty hunters spent weeks on the trails without finding a trace. Dart lived among native tribes for a time, learning survival techniques that white men did not know. That kept him alive for decades in a territory where black men faced extra danger at every turn. Over time, Dart tried to go straight. He bought a small ranch in Browns Park, Colorado, and tried to live as an honest cattle rancher, but his reputation followed him. The big ranchers in the area did not want a black man with a criminal past as a neighbor. They began pressuring to get him out of there. When legal pressure did not work, they resorted to a more definitive method. They hired Tom Horn, one of the most feared gunmen of the era. In October 1900, Isom Dart was 51 years old and trying to live in peace. Tom Horn did not care. He ambushed Dart on a cold morning at Cold Spring Mountain in Colorado. 2 precise shots ended the life of a man who had escaped dozens of bounty hunters, but could not escape a professional killer hired by wealthy ranchers. The frontier did not kill only with bullets, it killed with money. The final irony is that Tom Horn, the killer of Dart, ended up hanged 3 years later, accused of killing a 14-year-old boy under similar circumstances. Frontier justice was circular. The gunman who killed the horse thief was killed by the gallows. Isom Dart spent his whole life escaping. In the end, he discovered that there is no speed fast enough when the system decides you need to disappear for real. Number 15. George McJunkin, the cowboy who rewrote the prehistory of America and nobody believed him. Born enslaved in Texas in 1851, McJunkin had no access to any school. Even so, he taught himself to read, to play the violin, and to study geology. He worked as a cowboy and foreman in New Mexico, but his curiosity went far beyond cattle. He observed rocks, fossils, and geological formations with eyes that most did not even know existed. In 1908, after a violent flood near Folsom, New Mexico, McJunkin noticed something strange in a ravine exposed by the water. Enormous bones mixed with spearheads made by human hands. They were bones of bison that had been extinct for thousands of years, alongside tools that proved human presence on the continent far earlier than any scientist had imagined. McJunkin knew he had found something monumental. McJunkin spent years trying to convince scientists and academics to examine the site. He wrote letters, invited researchers, and begged for attention. Almost nobody took him seriously. A black, self-taught cowboy saying he had found evidence that rewrote American prehistory? The academic community laughed. The color of his skin and the lack of a degree weighed more than the physical evidence buried in that ravine. George McJunkin died in 1922 without seeing any recognition for his discovery. Only years later did researchers finally visit the site and confirm everything. The artifacts proved that human beings had inhabited America for over 10,000 years. The so-called Folsom site revolutionized archaeology and rewrote what was known about the arrival of humans on the continent. The name in the books, Folsom, not McJunkin. Science gained one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century thanks to a black, self-taught cowboy that nobody wanted to listen to. McJunkin did not have a degree, did not have money, and did not have the right skin to be taken seriously, but he had eyes that saw what others ignored, and a persistence that the Academy did not deserve. All of America walks on the history that McJunkin unearthed, and almost nobody knows his name. Number 16. Willie Kennard, the black sheriff who pacified a town by himself. In the 1870s, the small town of Yankee Hill, Colorado, had a problem that nobody could solve. A gang that terrorized residents, scared off sheriffs, and controlled the streets with violence. Every lawman who accepted the position did not last long. Some resigned, others simply disappeared. The town was at the mercy of outlaws. That is when Willie Kennard showed up. Black, a former soldier, with a shooting accuracy that impressed anyone who saw him fire. The gang itself, in a mix of arrogance and mockery, challenged Kennard to accept the position of sheriff, convinced he would be easy prey. They calculated wrong. Kennard accepted the challenge, took the badge, and went hunting. He did not ask for backup. He did not wait for orders from anyone. He went straight to the problem with the calm of a man who has seen worse. Kennard faced the leaders of the gang in separate duels. With lethal precision, he took down the two main chiefs. The rest scattered. In a matter of days, Yankee Hill had something it had not experienced in years: silence. The streets grew calm, the shops reopened, and families went back to walking around without fear. A black man did in days what dozens of white men could not do in years. Peace had a color, and it was not the one they expected. But here comes the mystery. After pacifying Yankee Hill, Willie Kennard simply disappeared from the historical records. The documents from the 1880s stopped mentioning him. Nobody knows for certain where he went, how he lived the rest of his life, or where he died. Historians debate to this day whether the stories about him were exaggerated over time, but one thing is certain. Someone cleaned up that town, and the name that stuck was his. At the end of the day, the Old West was never white. That is the truth that nobody wants to admit. Every trail was opened, every town was protected, every railroad was built with black sweat that Hollywood preferred to paint white. The names change, the centuries pass, but the script remains the same. Black people build, white people take the credit, and history pretends it was always that way. Except now you know it was not.